Hey guys, thanks for checking in on the NFN Radio News Podcast, brought to you by Not Fake News.biz. I'm Bob Gatty, editor and publisher of Not Fake News. What's an angry mob? It depends upon whose version of the truth you accept. Donald Trump's and his enablers, or those who understand the facts. In just the past year, let alone the totality of the Trump administration, we've had all too many examples of angry mobs acting and reacting to events, not the least of which was a January 6th attack on the Capitol as Trump supporters protested Joe Biden's election. Perhaps these actions by angry mobs are simply a symptom of our broken nation. Consider that we had a brutal murder play out on camera in front of millions of viewers, but the perp could go free. And we had an election where losers are now trying to fix future elections. In this podcast, I'll present two blogs by C.J. Waldron on notfakenews.biz. First will be The Angry Mob, followed by Our Broken America. So take a listen from notfakenews.biz. Derek Chauvin was distracted by an angry mob, resulting in the death of George Floyd. Lieutenant G.D. Langford arrested Georgia lawmaker Park Cannon because he feared a repeat of the January 6th riot. And then, Attorney General William Barr repeatedly referred to Black Lives Matter protesters as rioters during congressional testimony regarding systemic racism in law enforcement. Meanwhile, Senator Ron Johnson, the Republican from Wisconsin, claims he would be concerned if those who took part in the insurrection were BLM instead of loyal Trump supporters. He further pushed the false narrative that the insurrectionists were fake Trump supporters and provocateurs planted by Antifa to cause violence. He claimed that the protesters weren't armed because they didn't possess firearms. And if that weren't enough, there is the ultimate master of denial, Donald Trump. In a vain attempt to rewrite history, Trump is revising the events of January 6th. In his warped version, there was no violent insurrection. Instead, there were peaceful protesters who were hugging and kissing police and were invited in and then left quietly, despite video evidence to the contrary. Of course, he has his backers on what used to be called the state-run media, Fox News. Commentator Tucker Carlson is under fire as he attempts to rewrite history when it comes to the January 6th insurrection. Like Trump, Carlson claimed the insurrectionists wandered freely around the Capitol because it was, after all, the people's house, and it was therefore their right to do so. He completely ignores the violent protests, the cries to hang Mike Pence, or do harm to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and instead paints the protesters as peaceful old men. These are the competing arguments as the definition of an angry mob remains subject to which side the aisle you are on. One side claims that the violence is one-sided, with racial overtones reminiscent of the previous administration. The other, backed by facts, continues to push these facts, which are being twisted, denied, and revisited to fit a distorted vision of America. Now, taking a page from the Trump playbook, defense attorneys in the Derek Chauvin trial are attempting to convince a jury to ignore the video evidence and instead focus their ire at the angry mob that was keeping him from doing what he viewed as his legal duty. The claim is that this caused Chauvin to lose track of the amount of time he was pressing down on George Floyd's neck. In this implausible theory, those screaming at Chauvin to get off Floyd were actually the ones who need to be held responsible for his death, and not the one who was on trial. This defense quickly unraveled as witness after witness testified about their reactions at Chauvin's actions. They included a 61-year-old man who broke down in tears as he recanted how he tried to get Floyd to comply with the officers, an off-duty firefighter who was rebuffed when she offered to give Floyd medical attention, a mixed martial arts fighter who described the type of hold Chauvin was applying and who called 911 to report Chauvin's actions, and even a 9-year-old who testified that medics asked Chauvin to get off Floyd's neck. While these people and others were shouting at Chauvin to get off Floyd as he begged for his life, they were far from the angry mob the defense is trying to portray. When then Attorney General William Barr testified before Congress, he called the Black Lives Matter protests an assault on the government. During his testimony, he repeatedly interrupted members of Congress who referred to them as protesters by interjecting rioters. He depicted them as an angry mob, hell-bent on destruction and looting. While there indeed was some damaging of businesses and looting, these incidents were limited, despite the focus on the acts by right-wing media, who ignored the fact that many of the acts of violence were, in fact, incited by right-wing groups such as the Boogaloo Boys. Instead, like Barr, they ignored the reasons for the protests and denied there was any systemic racism in law enforcement. Now, prior to the events of January 6, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, along with Senators Josh Hawley, the Republican from Minnesota, and Ted Cruz, the Republican from Texas, spearheaded the effort to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. Even though he withdrew his objections following the insurrection, it did not stop him from later attempting to rewrite history by having selective recall of the events while also making racist remarks related to the Black Lives Matter movement. Despite the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, Johnson is attempting to depict the Capitol protesters as largely peaceful and unarmed. He later claimed that he would not have been worried if he had to walk through a crowd of the insurrectionists, but would feel threatened if he had to walk among Black Lives Matter protesters. These remarks have been slammed as racist, but Johnson continues to stand by them as he denies the reality of an attempt to overthrow the government. Picking up on Ron Johnson's outlandish assertions and lacking the social media megaphone that he used so effectively, Trump took to his favorite propaganda network and made the baseless claim that there were no protesters. Instead, he tried to gaslight his supporters, using the same "don't believe your eyes" tactic he employed during his unsuccessful bid for re-election. He claimed that what we saw as rioters were actually peaceful protesters who were exercising their constitutional rights to dispute a stolen election. Ignoring the dead and injured, Tucker Carlson tried to push the false narrative that the insurrectionists came to Washington armed only with extremely dangerous ideas. He completely swept away any notions of violence and ignored the poles, the flags, the bear spray, and other weapons the insurrectionists possessed as they forced their way into the Capitol. Instead of violent insurrectionists, Carlson described a mob of older people from unfashionable zip codes. With both sides differing as to what constitutes an angry mob, it's easy to see why America remains so divided. On one side, you have those armed with facts and even live-stream video to back up their claims. On the other, you have conspiracy theories and a huge distortion of the issues. Unless those who follow those lies are willing to listen to the facts, there will always be another angry mob. So with that, we'll take a quick break here, but I'll be right back with our Broken America. So stay tuned. America is broken. We have a murder captured live on camera. Yet the legal system allows the alleged murderer to argue whether we should believe our eyes. We have an election system where the losers are attempting to prevent people from participating in their constitutional rights. And speaking of constitutional rights, we have Second Amendment advocates claiming their rights are being violated because President Biden is proposing to end protections that gun manufacturers enjoy if their products are used in the commission of a felony. Yes, America is indeed broken. There is nary a person who hasn't seen the video of George Floyd begging for his life as Derek Chauvin continued to kneel in his neck, literally squeezing the life out of him. Yet, despite this overwhelming evidence, the American judicial system allows Chauvin to mount a defense even if the acts are blatantly indefensible. Yes, the American judicial system is broken. Based upon English law, the burden of proof in determining the guilt or innocence of the accused is based upon the prosecution establishing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. While that does not mean beyond all doubt, it can be the mindset of a single juror that can determine the outcome of a case. Therefore, it is the role of the defense to show not that their client is innocent, but only to create a reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. By giving alternative theories and sowing confusion, many presumed guilty parties have been led off by fast-talking lawyers who were able to muddle the facts. Given the penchant for those on the right to believe conspiracy theories over facts, Chauvin could indeed be acquitted in some misguided attempt to support blue lives over justice. A lone juror could result in a hung jury. Yes, despite overwhelming evidence, Derek Chauvin could indeed go free. Our justice system is broken. The results of the 2020 elections were a mixed bag. While Donald Trump lost the White House and Republicans lost their majority in the Senate, Republicans gained ground in the House of Representatives and in a majority of state houses. Despite these gains, Republicans are launching multiple efforts to restrict voting in future elections based upon the big lie. With Republicans in control of a majority of state legislatures, they are seeking to gain political advantage by restricting the right to vote, primarily in minority areas where Democrats were successful in 2020. Through gerrymandering, limiting early or mail-in ballots, voter drop box access, allowing state governments to overturn election results, and even refusing to allow those who must stand in line for hours due to limited polling places from receiving water. Republicans are seeking to suppress voter participation by making it more difficult to cast ballots. These actions are an anathema to a participatory democracy and a direct response to Donald Trump's repeated false claims of a stolen election. Instead, they're a blatant attempt to rig future elections in favor of Republicans. They're also an attempt to appease Trump supporters and ensure their support in future elections. Republicans counter that they are addressing unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud while launching so-called election integrity brigades in predominantly minority districts. While their stated goal is to monitor areas where perceived fraud is occurring, they are being placed in districts that have a primarily minority population. Contrary to their stated purpose, the placement of these poll watchers is nothing short of voter intimidation. Republicans also oppose efforts by the federal government to institute nationwide voter standards. The For the People Act would eliminate gerrymandering, improve election integrity, expand voter registration, and address campaign finance reform. These efforts are being portrayed as overreach by the federal government over states' rights. And finally, Republicans are calling for a boycott of companies and organizations that are protesting their efforts at voter suppression. Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, and even Major League Baseball have taken steps to counter these provisions, while Republicans have threatened these businesses with political retaliation. The hypocrisy of their claims of cancel culture remains lost on them. The electoral system is broken. America, the land of the free. So why, if America is such a desirable destination, is the United States ranked among the most dangerous countries in the world for international travelers? The answer lies in the fact that our nation ranks among the highest when it comes to gun violence. In fact, there are more guns than people in this country. Since not every American owns a gun, it is logical to assume that many Americans own multiple firearms. When restrictions associated with the coronavirus pandemic began easing, there was also an increase in gun violence. In response to this, and to fulfill a campaign promise, President Biden issued an executive order aimed at stemming gun violence. While many gun control advocates claim these measures fall far short of his campaign promises, it also demonstrates the limits of executive authority when it comes to regulating firearms. Predictably, Republicans claim these measures violate Second Amendment protections, as well as being executive overreach. However, it's a provision not in the executive order that is causing Republicans the most concern. The Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, which largely protects gun manufacturers from liability, has been a target of Biden since his days in the Senate. Holding gun manufacturers liable for injuries or deaths could spell the death knell for the gun industry, according to some experts. The argument that the Second Amendment gives everyone the right to unlimited firearms has long been disputed. Former Chief Justice Warren Burger argued that the intent of the Founding Fathers in writing the amendment was not to promote the current gun culture of ammosexuals, but to ensure that a state militia would be well armed in case of invasion by a foreign power. Of course, the gun lobby, led by the NRA, disputes this and is pointing to President Biden's executive order to repeat its useful scare tactic that Democrats are coming for your guns. The Second Amendment is broken. There are so many other things that require fixing in our nation. Addressing climate change, the pandemic, infrastructure, immigration reform, financial inequities, and health care are among the current pressing issues. And certainly the future will present more problems. It's how we face these problems that will tell you if we are to survive as a country. Hey guys, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. It'd be great if you'd follow NFN Radio News so you don't miss an episode. Just look for NFN Radio News at Spreaker.com and click on my picture. Check out Not Fake News.biz too, where you'll find new material just about every day by some excellent writers with perspectives on a whole range of topics. You can sign up as a member at NotFakeNews.biz. And of course, it's all free. Also, let your friends know about this podcast and about NotFakeNews.biz. Our goal is to be informative and entertaining as we comment on the latest developments in the news with just a little lean to the left. And don't forget to check out Tempo in the Times, our new companion podcast with co-host Scott Raminger. Streaming right now is an episode in which former New Jersey Governor Jim Florio makes his debut as a guest host, and the topic is the development of wind energy. We have a fascinating guest, so check it out. Tomorrow, April 16, we'll be posting a new episode on Tempo in the Times, this one with veteran journalist and journalism professor Guy Reel. Scott and I talk with him about the state of journalism today, fake news, what causes all of this, or a lot of it, and much more. So watch for that on Tempo in the Times starting tomorrow, April 16. Plus, you can learn more about these episodes and for easy access to all of them. Just visit tempointhetimes.com. So, hey, thanks for listening, guys. This is Bob Gatty signing off for NFN Radio News and Not Fake News.biz.